Friends, our second reading today comes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 45. Listen now for the word of the Lord. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, friends, as we continue our series, The Good Samaritan Bites the Dust, a series on English phrases that actually originate in the Bible, you can guess that today's phrase is an eye for an eye. So coming from our book today, it says, the principle of equal retribution is one of the oldest legal ideas in history, found both in the ancient Babylonian laws of Hammurabi and in the Old Testament. In the book of Exodus, God tells Moses, thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, and wound for wound. This so-called lex talionis, or law of retribution, does have the virtue of simplicity, but it hardly fits with the modern ideas about prisoner rehabilitation and human rights. What's more, Jesus famously rejected an eye for an eye in his Sermon on the Mount, preferring to turn the other cheek. However, the ancient code hasn't died out entirely. In 2008, an Iranian man who blinded and disfigured a woman in an acid attack was condemned in a criminal court in Tehran to be blinded himself, giving literal meaning to an eye for an eye justice. Our example from the book today says, when Rula burned a hole in my favorite jacket, I took an eye for an eye and fed her new shoes to the dog. So, friends, the idea behind the code of Hammurabi in ancient Babylon and the laws of ancient Rome, which both used this philosophy, was actually to prevent the strong from harming the weaker. However, today we operate by a more informed system of justice, one which aims to stop the behavior by addressing the root of the behavior. And this would be called therapy, or rehabilitation, or course correction. Now, after all, who does it really help to harm for harm? And what if we accidentally, falsely accuse someone and take that eye that can never be put back? Such a system invites vigilantism, and it puts justice into the hands of individuals, much like in the wild, wild west. So to return to such a time would be absolutely frightening. It may encourage people to be on better behavior, yes. But do we truly trust other people to be insightful, compassionate, and kind when we ourselves have bad moments, when we ourselves make mistakes? How many times in life have we seen something and realized that it's not actually what it seems? How many times have we shaken our heads to find out that we simply didn't understand what was going on? Do we trust others not to be rash, not to rush to judgment, not to buy into the hearsay and the conjecture? An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. Meaning that if someone has wronged us, we too are then made wrong by doing the same thing in return to them. We're no better. In order to stop this cycle of harm, we must be willing to turn the other cheek and look in a new direction. Kindness begets kindness just as much as harm begets harm. The eye for an eye phrase in the Bible is the perfect example of human attempts at justice. versus God's idea of justice. So in the Old Testament, it is used to exact vengeance, to strike fear into the would-be criminal. In the New Testament, however, Jesus tells us instead to turn the other cheek, showing compassion and breaking the cycle of mistreatment, taking that higher road. Now, as I was pondering today's sermon and watching the Olympics, as I'm sure that many of you have been as well, I was reminded of the story of Les Miserables and the plight of Jean Valjean, the man who was imprisoned for 19 years just for stealing a loaf of bread to feed his family during a famine. Now, in those 19 years of imprisonment, he was forced into hard labor, pushing his body to the limits. And then when he was released, he struggled. Of course he struggled to find his way back into a normal life again. For 19 years, he had been punished beyond the crime that had been committed. That will do unimaginable things to one's brain. Now, when he is released on parole, he ends up stealing a coin from a boy because he has nothing. He has no trust in other people, and he doesn't want to be vulnerable anymore, understandably after the way he's been treated for almost 20 years. And for this, he is pursued yet again. And so he runs into a church, and he finds refuge there for a moment. But on his way out, he steals the bishop's silver candlesticks, perhaps hoping to get enough money to ease his problems, to erase his problems even, and to find some long-desired peace. But alas, he is caught in the streets, and he is brought right back there before the bishop, police having each arm on the side of him. And he is placed before this bishop, and the bishop looks upon him, and he claims to the police that he gave Jean Valjean those candlesticks as a gift. The bishop broke the cycle. He chose compassion, and it was this small act, this small sacrifice, that gave Jean Valjean the path to redemption. Those candlesticks continue to resurface throughout the film. If you watch the film version, you will see them throughout the scenes. Those candlesticks were always reminding him of his charge, given to him in sincere hope and grace to do better, to make himself a better man, to become the man he always could become. And in his final days, he goes and he sits back in that same church. The bishop is now long gone. And there we see the candlesticks again. And he sits in that chair, and he's old and he's weathered, and he is there knowing that the next step is to meet his Maker, who gave him a right to that path, to give life to the love that he could give to his children. Now, a simple act of compassion, the giving of those candlesticks, for example, that simple act can change the world for one person. And that is profound. It is through simple acts that we truly do change the world. And when I was studying forensic psychology in college, I took an internship in a maximum security, all-male juvenile facility for those who suffered from addictions and for those who had committed the most heinous of crimes. Now, as we know, in the juvenile justice system, eventually juveniles do get set free. And the hope is that they will grow into adults who will never re-enter that system. The methods of psychologists and prison teachers and workers in the States are admittedly behind, but the attempt is there to rehabilitate these young men through the gifts that they were never given, things that we take for granted, that our children take for granted. Routine, getting up at the same time every day, receiving a meal, showering, going to school, having exercise, PE class, getting fed a lunch. Not every kid can rely on breakfast or lunch or dinner. And then after this, the prisoners would go to therapy. And then they would exercise again, and they'd receive dinner, complete with vegetables and maybe a brownie. And then they'd have relaxation time where they'd play cards with one another or games. And then every day at the same time, they would go to bed. Simple things. Simple things you and I take for granted every day these children never had because nobody cared for them. Most juveniles who end up in these facilities come from homes where food is not available, not even twice a day, where nobody cares about them. The parents just let them do whatever they want. Nobody encourages them. They go to schools where the teachers are completely worn down and overwhelmed, where the other kids influence them into practices that are not good. They don't have access to extracurriculars. Forget band class. School doesn't have funding for instruments. Nobody believes in their success. So whose failure is that? They are raised with little to no guidance. And if they have guidance, it's not from anybody who actually cares. So they are left to make choices that they believe will benefit them in the here and the now because all they know is today. How can I get something to eat today? How can I not get stabbed today? How can I take care of my mom today? That's the line I heard the most in the juvenile facility. How is my mom? So, should we lock them up? Throw away the key? Forget about them? We failed them after all. Did the crime not begin with us as a society? Or should we try to turn things around and give society one more functioning person who can go to work, who can contribute to the good of the society, right the wrongs through the system? This is kind of a touchy subject, and I know this. The justice system has always been a touchy subject, and I understand that this is not a cut and dry issue. This is not a black and white issue. There is so much to it that even my schooling and my education and my experience in that limited internship, I would not know all of the avenues available or all of the things I should be to qualify as an expert on this subject. But I do know that our justice system is not perfect, and nor is any country's. It wasn't perfect in ancient Rome or in ancient Babylon with an eye for an eye, and it isn't perfect today. Sociology, the study of society's systems and people groups, of economics, of justice, of psychology, it's this huge, tangled, and messy web that we as people make our decisions based off of those influences in our lives. Think about the person sitting next to you and all of the different choices they might make based off of the ways that they were raised. And then look at this world and all the different ways that people grow up in it. We will never have a totally crime-free society. But as long as we strive to greet the root of the problem rather than to treat the symptom, we can say that we are doing our very best. Jean Valjean stole a piece of bread. Was it wrong? Yes. But why did Jean Valjean do it? His family was starving. His baby was starving. So what is the real problem then? That he stole a piece of bread, or that there were families all throughout France who were dying of starvation and desperate? Did 19 years of prison and hard, almost slave labor solve the issue and redeem society? Did it make it better? No. The act that brought redemption was found in a church, when a bishop showed unwarranted compassion in a moment of empathy and of grace. The bishop turned the other cheek. In Norway, the justice system strives to do the same, to turn the other cheek. Rather than avenge the crime itself, they seek to avenge the individual. As of 2018, only 18% of the incarcerated in Norway ever returned to the system. In the United States, during that same year, 2018, of all those who committed crimes, the ones who committed crimes again and re-entered the system, was 68%. And within a 3 to 5 year period after release, it rose to 80%. 80% of the United States prison population returns to prison within 3 to 5 years. In Norway, within that time frame of 3 to 5 years, it is only 25%. 1/4 of those incarcerated in Norway ever returned to the system. Over 3/4 of those incarcerated in the United States returned to the system. This is the difference between treating the symptom and treating the human. In Norway, the goal of a prison sentence is to only take away liberty, but not sacrifice rights. Prisoners are treated as human beings, given education, skills, ordinary tasks, and care routines that make transitioning back into a normal life much more easy and smooth after release. In fact, each prisoner is even given an advocate in the system if they have complaints about the system. They're actually listened to and treated like real people. Can you imagine? When people feel valued and invested in, most of the time they will value and invest in themselves. Now think on this. From the bishop in Les Mis to the rehabilitation efforts in Norway, how do we treat those who have wronged us? And I speak now as us as individuals. And do we value ourselves and invest in ourselves as much as God values and invests in us? To be the very best that we can be, to not stoop down beneath the standards that we have set for ourselves. Now, I will admit, vengeance definitely does feel good in the moment. It's nice to say, ha, told you so. We've all done it. But it does not help anyone. And that's the difficult thing. Every leader learns this when faced with adversity. And even the most practiced struggle when enough is enough. Kind people can get very tired of being kind. It would be easier if we were all more kind on average. Those little acts of compassion, if we all just invested the effort in ourselves to practice compassion more frequently, an eye for an eye becomes a toxic cycle. And stopping a cycle, choosing to remove yourself from the realm of harmful behavior, is an act of care for yourself and for others, and in its silence, it is courageous. A person who has been abused or taken advantage of, who turns around and shows others only their beauty through compassion and gentleness, that is the strongest person that you may ever meet. They are no longer the victim. They have taken it upon themselves to be the good in the world when the world has only been bad to them. One who has seen and felt the terrors and chooses not to inflict them on others is a warrior against forces more powerful than any other human could possibly become. And such is love. Love demands warriors. Warriors against the temptations to take the easy street, to descend into those wide open valleys, tread and worn by those, to take ease by the generations of the past. Turning the other cheek takes guts. It means growing to be the bigger person, having the power to harm and choosing not to use it, having the strength and choosing to be gentle. To turn the other cheek is courageous and impactful. Now, I want to be heard here. Turning the other cheek does not ignore justice. It doesn't just let things slide on by. But it seeks to further God's justice, founded on compassion and grace and hope. These things, they're not soft They're not yielding. They're not for pushovers. This is not for the ignorant. These are the things meant for the strong who have been forged in the fires, and they instead have chosen water. The force that over time gently carves stones into canyons and grows plants from dry soil. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth? No. A cheek to the hand that would strike it is more powerful than any weapon or bully or tyrant. For Jean Valjean and for those like him, may you find bishops in your life to give you love in times of desperation and of misunderstanding. For the discarded and for those who are uncared for, who maybe feel invisible, may those with eyes to see you seek you out and treasure you to health and to wholeness again. And for the hurt and the scarred, may you choose to rise above it and know the rewards of love. And for all of us, each one of us here today, all of us have hurt another person before. May we strive to do better, to be redeemed through that practice of choosing love and compassion day by day. Stop the cycle, turn the cheek, love the enemy, and by loving the enemy, love God. Amen.